science and nature activities for Cooped Up Kids and how it can help you both explore STEM indoors and out. So thanks so much for joining us tonight. Let's jump on in. We're all feeling probably a little over familiar with Zoom and other online platforms these days, but just in case you haven't used Zoom before, I want to go over a couple of things with you. When I went full screen, it probably went full screen for you. So I'm going to recommend that you actually exit full screen. This will allow you to dock the chat window to the side and participate in any conversations that we have going on there. So the next thing you'll want to do after you exit full screen by using the drop-down option menu on the top, or for some folks hitting escape will do the trick, is you're going to want to look for the little speech bubble that says chat and click on that. And that should open the chat window to the side of your screen. From there, right above where you send your message, you're going to want to find the drop-down menu. And it should say something like everyone or all panelists and attendees. That will make sure that everyone can see the messages that you're sending. And so you can have conversations and share your knowledge with each other in the chat window as well. So my name is Kelly Schaefer, and I'm coming to you from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. I specifically work with the K-12 education team. I'm the outreach coordinator here, and I'm joined by Susan Licker in the chat window, who can field questions for you and share some resource links as well. This webinar is being recorded, so if you miss anything, don't worry. I'll be sending a link out to the recording on our YouTube channel when it gets posted later this week. And here on the K-12 education team, our mission is all about taking the amazing things that the resources that the lab produces and packaging them in different ways to make them available for educators. And we do that both through creating free resources, but also by providing professional development trainings that are all really focused on helping educators and families connect young people to their local habitats, explore biodiversity, and engage in citizen science projects. I see there's a question in the chat the chat window about video. I'm not sharing my video tonight, but hopefully you can see the slides just fine. Let me know if you have any issues with seeing the slides. All right, so let's jump into this topic. And one of the things I wanted to do in this webinar is talk a little bit about the motivations for getting kids outside. Time and time again, when we talk to our audience and we ask, what's the most important meeting standards or things like that, the response we get is getting kids outside. And I think that's just such a wonderful thing to want to do for our young people. And there's a lot of literature that supports that motivation. You may be familiar with the book called Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. This is a book that kind of introduces the concept of nature deficit disorder, which is just kind of a buzzwordy way of saying that our disconnect from nature has some negative effects on our well-being. Some of those things that we see as a human cost of alienation from nature includes a diminished use of the senses, some attention challenges, as well as higher rates of physical and emotional diseases. So we see that being separated from nature has an impact on the whole person, right? Your spiritual, social, environmental, and physical well-being. So how can we as educators play a role in kind of reducing these effects? The good news is that there's lots of great information out there. You might be familiar with SEL, or social emotional learning skills. And as we're thinking about our science classrooms and our mission of getting kids outside, these are things I like to keep in mind as well. These 5 core competencies from CASTLE, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. So things like self-management, where we're helping kids develop skills to manage their emotions and behaviors and to achieve goals, as well as self-awareness, recognizing your own emotions and your own values and thoughts. And what's important to me as well in self-awareness is it's also about being able to see your own potential. And that's something that in the science classroom, I think that we as educators have an opportunity to help more people see their potential in the realm of science, technology, engineering, and math. And then all of the amazing things that happen when you work at problem solving or social awareness, responsible decision making, and developing relationship skills as well. And we look at those things in the context of outdoor learning, we can see some great opportunities for developing skills. So this infographic is from the Children and Nature Network. They have a lot of really wonderful resources out there that kind of go through the benefits of outdoor learning. So if this is something you're interested in doing and you need some buy-in from your administration, this can be a great place to go to find some of the supporting research and some really beautiful infographics, which we'll go over some of those tonight. Of course, they also have a lot of papers and more in-depth resources to support these. So we see that this is looking at green schoolyards, and having green schoolyards promotes some important social emotional skills, including relationship skills. So just in cooperative play, kids are building skills like behaving civilly to one another, creating positive social relationships. And then we see skills develop in the self-awareness and self-management areas, including reducing aggression and discipline problems. And some research has found that gardening at schools helps students with that kind of potential piece that we talked about. It can create a sense of pride and responsibility and confidence. All great things that we would love to see our kids develop. One of the things that I think about too is that building social emotional skills outside helps the environment as well. So it's part of this bigger picture that we need to help kids develop a connection to the environment. As Stephen Jay Gould would say, for we will not fight to save what we do not love. And I love this quote as well from David Sobel, who is kind of one of the pioneers of place-based education. And he says that what is important is that children have an opportunity to bond with the natural world, to learn to love it, and to feel comfortable in it before being asked to heal its wounds. So by incorporating outdoor learning into our everyday practice, we provide the opportunity to build comfort, to build familiarity, and to just build the kind of connections over time that lead to love. And it's also an equity and justice issue. So the QR code here on your screen will actually lead to a great article about the importance of getting outdoors, or excuse me, the importance of green space now in the time of COVID and after COVID especially. And this quote is from that article. And it says that studies show that nature's benefits are relatively greater for those who are negatively impacted by economic disadvantage, systemic racism, trauma, opportunity gaps, and other challenges. So by building into our practice, getting outdoors and into green spaces, we can help alleviate some of these gaps as well. So before we go on further, I just wanted to take a moment to give everybody the opportunity to reflect on what social and emotional benefits maybe you have personally experienced from spending time outdoors, as well as what benefits you may have seen in your students or children. Please feel free to take a couple minutes to reflect personally, but if you would like to, I would love for you to share some thoughts in the chat window as well. And while you're thinking, I'll just share an experience with you from the NSTA conference this past week. I asked this same question, and people were sharing stories about just getting outside for 15 minutes a week, or one teacher was sharing that like she's got her sixth graders at the very end of the day, and if she doesn't let them outside to do a lap or two around the garden, like they just can't focus on their lessons. And so there's just maybe even just for spending a brief period of time outside, even if it isn't incorporated into your lessons, educators are seeing some benefits. So some folks are sharing in the chat window that they're noticing calmer and more focused students after being outside. Stress relief, calmer, better able to control their body in the classroom. Some people are personally reflecting that they experience stress relief, and that helps keep the brain engaged. Observing others becoming more calm and more relaxed, an increased sense of wonder and curiosity. And Alyssa's sharing that she personally doesn't think that could work at a job that kept indoors full time. Need the outdoors to clear your mind, relax, and remember what I'm doing and why. Absolutely, that's something I can relate to as well. It's wonderful to hear people are seeing these effects in their own practice. Personally as well, I feel like having access to the outdoors provides, I guess I would say, context for my life. I had, during the pandemic, I have a very digital life. And I started out the pandemic in a basement apartment where it was very dark and chilly, and it was easy to feel very disconnected. But when I started purposefully incorporating outdoor time, I saw, it was spring, the birds were coming back, they were starting to nest, and all of a sudden, like, my little digital life had a larger context, which, made little problems, or problems that seemed big before, seem smaller. Vanessa's sharing that even a simple mask break that you could take outside can be helpful. Yeah, for sure. So thank you for sharing those experiences. I wanted to just go back to the Children in Nature Network infographics for a moment, because a lot of what you said is reflected here. If you look at the bottom half of the infographic, we see some of the social emotional benefits of learning in nature. We see that reduced stress and aggression that you guys mentioned. We see that we have outdoor play increasing activity levels as well. So some people were saying like it helps them regulate their bodies as well. So having that outlet can be great when you come back into the classroom. So that little note on the bottom is children are better able to cope with stress when they live near trees and other greenery. And I think in the pandemic that has become very apparent to a lot of us is this effect that nature has on our well-being. And again, when it comes to academic performance, we see benefits including focus and attention, a decrease in ADHD symptoms. We see creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving all being enhanced, and even boosts in performance in writing and reading and STEM skills. So there's lots of great research out there to to support the things that you have seen personally in your practice. All right, so we know now that learning outdoors is a great benefit, but it isn't always possible or easy to incorporate into our practice, particularly over the last year and a half when things are constantly changing. It's been an exercise in flexibility and adaptivity for so many educators across the country. I admire you all for your work in trying to stay afloat and be there for your students. And that's something that we wanted to support here at our program is trying to fill some of the gaps. So I'm sharing this with you because this is the genesis of the activities we're going to discuss in a minute here. So back in March of 2020, the world really did change, and so did the needs of educators and families with schools closing really suddenly. There was a gap in time where there weren't a lot of materials, and there were families who were suddenly all trying to work from home and have their kids home. So we thought that we could create some resources for these families and teachers to help support remote learning. And in that process, we wanted to make really adaptable resources that could be used for remote learning, in person, or blended learning. It could be used by families or by teachers. And that did find ways to get kids outside so they could experience some of these stress relieving benefits and other benefits we discussed of outdoor learning. And part of the challenge is that, with remote learning, you are relying on screens. So how can you balance that and have the benefit of the outdoors, but still have some great content learning going on? And so Cooped Up Kids was kind of our answer to that. So it was designed with families and educators in mind. Each week we released a new lesson that was articulated across the grade bands, K2, 3, 5, and 6, 8. And we incorporated as much independent work and multidisciplinary work as we could, with so writing prompts, art prompts, things that could be done independently. For the K2, it does rely on having an adult present for most of the time for reading help, but we did incorporate, again, these independent prompts. And wherever possible, outdoor activities. So this is kind of a glimpse at Cooped Up Kids, which Susan will share a link to kind of the homepage for this resource. We wanted to make these lessons really approachable for facilitators. So they have a Google Docs overview page where you can choose the grade band that's right for your students' reading level and age. And they link out to leveled slideshows that are kid-friendly and self-guided for 3, 5, and 6, 8, and will be easily guided, excuse me, for the K2 by an adult. Some of the limits we put on these activities is we wanted to have them use, common household objects and common classroom objects, so people wouldn't need to be finding specialized materials. And we also wanted to make sure wherever possible, we were including indoor options for our outdoor activities because we weren't sure what folks' access to the outdoors were going to be. As we move forward and return to some level of normalcy or discover our new normal, some of that may not be as relevant, but we want to leave that up to the educator as they're looking at these resources to decide what works in their setting best. Here is just kind of a glimpse of what these slideshows might look like. Very kid-friendly oriented, make use of some of the great lab resources online, games like Flat to the Future. They have fun thinking prompts and fun art prompts. You might be familiar with using airplanes to test out different wing lengths and how that affects things that fly. So some really just fun activities combined with great content. And so the next portion of our time together here tonight, I want to just go through what some of these look like so you can get an idea of how we approached these lessons, as well as some of the content that you can expect. So we currently have 13 activities out. You can see the variety of topics that they cover, from diversity to life cycles to bird identification. And as we, all that great content, but then as we progressed through the lessons, we started getting into some more sciencey concepts, like thinking like a scientist in the Observe and Wonder activity, getting into some cool conservation concepts in activity 13. So just a really great variety. Some of them feed into each other, which I'll talk about in a moment, but you can pretty much pick and choose from these activities. If there's a topic that you're interested in, you don't necessarily have to go through all of them to get there and get the most out of it. The exceptions might be the life cycle ones, which we'll talk about in a minute. We also did our best to level these in really fun and appropriate ways. So for example, when we discuss crow, not crow, and it looks like maybe I messed up including the video here, but it includes, for the K2 grade band, a really fun video of our colleague Leo reading Crow, Not Crow, which is a fantastic children's book by Jane Yolen that approaches bird ID in a super K2 friendly way. So it just focuses on whether a bird is a crow or not a crow. So a really great intro to bird ID, a really fun way to start feeling successful at bird ID for those age levels. So that's kind of the framing and the approach we took for the K2 grade band. And this would be activity 5, bird ID. And then as we got into the higher grade bands, we, are going more in depth into different topics. And so these 4 clues to bird ID would actually be in the 3-5 and 6-8. So looking at size and shape, color and pattern, behavior, and habitat range as your 4 key clues to bird identification. We do our best to take advantage of the online platform and have some fun things like this GIF of a great blue heron turning into a silhouette. Don't at me about the toes. I know there's not enough toes in the silhouette. But, this is a fun way to introduce the concept of size and shape for kids, because it's not super intuitive, but size and shape is actually one of the first clues to bird ID that you should really look at, because that will help you put the bird into a group. So you can recognize from this silhouette we see on screen right now, the long neck and long legs and long beak that point to a heron, even without having to try and pay attention to where the color is. So that's going to make this bird so much easier to identify. And so we play into that by having a fun silhouette shape guessing game. So let's go ahead and test our own shape identification ones. We're going to start out with maybe a trickier one. Let's look at number 3. What group would you put number 3 in? What type of bird? We're just looking for like the general group. Woodpeckers, for sure, absolutely. We see that nice tail bracing against the wood, nice pointy beak. What about number 5? What group would you put number 5 in? Paulette, I don't know if you meant for most of that goose to be capitalized, but I feel like that's appropriate when it comes to geese. They're very capitalized, energetic, sometimes intimidating creatures. Yes, absolutely. This is our ubiquitous friend, the Canada goose, enemy of golf courses everywhere. And then it's once you kind of look at this and you see how much information you can get just from looking at the shape of a bird. Like these aren't to scale either, right? If you look amongst them, the woodpecker is almost as big as the goose, which would scare me. But you can see how shape can be a really important clue to bird identification here. And here you can see the categories revealed in case you were curious. And then we can go into, looking more closely at the silhouettes and trying to match the silhouette to the bird that we think we might be looking at. So now you're going to be looking at like proportions of the body and different, the length of the tail, the length of the beak, how big is the crest. So what silhouette do you think belongs to the blue jay? You can use upper left, upper right, lower left. Upper left, absolutely. If we look closely at these other silhouettes, we'll notice some differences. The bird in the upper right-hand corner is a cardinal, and it has a really chunky, seed-eating triangular beak. The bird below that has a really tiny, delicate beak and a relatively shorter tail. That would be a tufted titmouse, I believe. And then the lower left, we have a much more slender, sleek bird with a small crest. I would call that a cedar waxwing. Cool. So you can see how you can incorporate some fun matching into these slides, as well as delivering some content about size and shape. For idea of how we might level this for 6 to 8, here is a bird ID challenge we've created. So some of you might be familiar with Merlin, which is the lab's free bird identification app. If you haven't used it, highly recommend it. If you don't have the app available, there is a version of Merlin that you can access from allaboutbirds.org. When you see the top menu bar come up, click Bird ID, and you could do this exercise using that. And so this is an exercise that we only have in the 6-8, because Merlin asks you a series of questions, and one of them is estimating the size of the bird relative to the size of some common birds. And one of them is the robin. So you can see we have the robin included here to challenge the 6-8 students to use that to determine relative size when they are doing their Merlin IDs. We can see our friend the blue jay there as well. If you're working on bird ID in the Northeast or Eastern part of the US, blue jay is a great one to put on your list. You'll feel very successful. They have that courtesy of saying their own name in their call. All right, so let's dive into the nesting cycle. This is one of the set of activities. It can be done separately, but I do recommend that they're done together. And I want to say this is activities 2, 3, and 4. And we break them down. We break down the nesting cycle into bite-sized pieces. So for example, I'm pulling from activity 2 here, or actually I believe this is activity 3. I have to correct that. And we're looking at specifically building a nest and laying and incubating eggs. So this nesting cycle has so much great content that we couldn't deliver it all at once without asking a little too much of our students. So We divided it into building a nest and laying and incubating eggs. So this this activity focuses on those, and we take advantage of some of the really amazing resources that the lab has, including our nest cams. So I am going to go ahead and play this little video clip for you. So this is from our bird cam of the red-tailed hawk nest here on campus in Ithaca. And you can see it is a chilly, snowy day, quite windy. And here are the hawks, carefully switching places, keeping those eggs toasty. Kind of an amazing process if you've never seen it before, and that's one of the benefits of having these amazing bird cams, is this really intimate look at the life of birds in the nest. This is making me want to get under a blanket like right now. So that's one of the ways we're able to use some of the great Cornell resources, as much as developing resources appropriate to changing learning situations can be, there are some benefits, and one of them is taking advantage of some of these great online resources. And it also ties in really well to some fun outdoor activities. So in each Cooped Up Kids, you'll find usually about 2 activities that are triad activities that go outside. So as I said, whenever we did have an outside activity originally, we wanted to have an inside option because we just weren't sure if everybody would have the same access to the outdoors when things were in lockdown. But as lockdowns have eased, would definitely encourage you to do the outdoor versions of these as weather allows. And I love this activity so much. If you haven't done it with kids, definitely give it a try. You can level it to different grade levels by adding different challenges. So for this one, challenging kids to build a nest out of natural materials that you find outside. So for the younger kids, just building the nest is a great, and figuring out what materials would be good to use is a great experience. If you want to make it more challenging, you can challenge kids to tape or rubber band their first 4 fingers together. And so they can only use their thumb and those 4 fingers grouped, kind of like a bird beak, to build the nest. You can also challenge them to build a nest that will hold 2 rocks as a symbol for the eggs. And we have one educator who's done this before with high school students, and he divides things into categories for points, and one of the categories is actually like aesthetic, like is it a beautiful nest? So there are all sorts of ways that you can enhance this for your students. If you know that artistic side will interest some of them, go for it. This can be such a fun way to explore natural materials and think about the challenges that really do go into building a nest, because they're kind of marvels of birdie engineering. Oh, and here you can see the suggestion to tape your thumb and fingers. Another activity included here, included this in our talk today because this is a really great example of the sort of activities we try to incorporate with things we hoped folks would have access to at home, like an egg. So this is a guided dissection of just a chicken egg, which you might not think would be terribly exciting, but I've done this with kids from kindergarten up until 5th grade with great success. And I guess I've done it with middle schoolers as well. I haven't done it with high schoolers, but personally, I think it would still be fun because it has you look at a normal object in a way that you just normally don't take the time to do. And so it goes through all of the supplies that you'll need to successfully complete your experiment. And it encourages you to use your observation skills on all parts of the egg, including the outside, and writing down and noting, the shape, the color, the texture, how it feels in your hand. And then cracking your egg, cracking your egg open and looking at the inside of the shell. How is it different from the outside? Even before you get to the inside of your egg, but then checking out the white and the yolk, seeing what's different. We have some great graphics to help with the exploration. This diagram is great. I never knew the name of the white stringy part, the chalaza, until working on this activity, so that was super fun. It's also an excellent word to say. And seeing the germinal disc can be really kind of a fun and interesting thing, but you might not see that if your eggs aren't fertilized. All right. So that's an example of, excuse me. That's an example of one of the fun low material activities we try to incorporate. Next, I wanted to share a fun activity from one of our later sections. I believe this would actually be activity 10 and not 8, so apologies for that error there. Think like a scientist. So one of the things we wanted to do was, throughout these activities, we really are trying to get kids to using observation skills, but we wanted to highlight in this lesson the importance of observation skills for scientific thinking. And also I wanted to just remind you quickly about the book by Richard Louv about nature deficit disorder, and how one of the effects of that is that we use our senses less. So talking about observation, pointing out that observation uses all of your senses really deliberately is a great way to combat some of that and get kids using those senses and incorporating them into their explorations outside. But one of the things we like to do is, again, take advantage of the great resources from the lab, like the bird cams, to do a fun observation-based activity. So I'm going to play this video for you, and I'd love for you to play along, either in your mind or on a scrap piece of paper. I want you to note every observation that you can. Just watch this like you are a scientist who is seeing this bird for the first time, and you want to record everything that's happening. So just jot down all of your different observations, everything that you notice. And we're going to look at those in a minute here. So I'm going to go ahead and play this for you. Sorry, I was muted. Okay, so that was a little glimpse into the life of an osprey nest. Anybody want to share any observations that they made in the chat window? So Kathy noticed that a fish was brought in, but neither of the birds ate the fish. That's a great observation, yeah. Ooh. One of the birds was calling, chirping, yeah, absolutely. The birds appear to be big birds or adults, but they sound like newly hatched chickens. It is an awfully kind of gentle sound for such a large bird, isn't it? Yeah, great observations. One of the things I like about this activity is just getting in the practice of writing down observations is forces you to articulate what you're thinking and what you're noticing. You might not realize all of the things you're observing until you start writing them down. And I think that's cool for kids to see a concrete evidence of that. But it also leads into the next part of this activity very well. One of the things that we always notice is that as educators, I'm sure you've noticed that, is observations often lead to awesome, curious questions. So we can challenge students to look at their observations and think about questions that they have related to it. So a question, for example, that Kathy might have is, why didn't they eat the fish that they brought to the nest? It also provides us with the opportunity to, for the older age groups particularly, look at this idea of an observation versus an inference. So I did skip over some content that actually happens in the lesson where we really go into depth into what observations are. So, we really hit the parts of observation being directly experienced with your senses. So we go through the senses and things. But here, when we go into the inferences, we go back into thinking about inferences as explanations about the observations. So inferences are, things you kind of put together based on your prior experiences or things that you already know. Yeah, so you might infer from the video we just watched, you might infer that this was a pair, right? A mated pair of osprey. So if you did write down your list, why don't you take a moment here to go back and examine that list and see if any of those things that you wrote down were actually inferences. So were you kind of putting together some puzzle pieces there? And if you notice any inferences, feel free to share them in the chat window too. One of the things I observed watching the video was that the nest was in a parking lot, which brought up a lot of questions for me about whether or not they're bothered by the presence of people. And you figure it must have been an active parking lot when they chose to build their nest there. So I guess you can infer from that that they really are not bothered by the cars or the people walking around below them. So Kathy is inferring that the pair were in the process of nest building and the fish was a gift, which the female was not quite yet ready to take. So Kathy, I'm guessing you have, well, I know that you do, but have some background knowledge on osprey. So you might know that male and females court and bringing fish as a gift might be part of that. Yeah, so you can kind of start to put together these cool puzzle pieces of what behavior was going on. Let me ask you all a different question. Why might it be important for our students to be able to differentiate between what is an observation and what is an inference? So in the chat window, Paloma is pointing out that an inference talks about prior knowledge. And you could run into some challenges there, right? Because say I know something about bald eagles and how bald eagles behave, I might make inferences about the osprey based on that because they're similar species. But what if the behaviors aren't actually the same? So Kathy's pointing out that inferences are not facts. They need to realize that because they can change based on your background knowledge. Absolutely. Yeah, so inferences might be something, a really like a way of understanding what you're looking at, but then you might also need to do some background research, right, to support that inference and make sure that you're interpreting your observations in a way that makes sense, right? So observations are kind of concrete things. So sometimes you might find students making observations about something that are actually inferences, and you might need to challenge them and ask them, well, how do you know? How is that observable? Or how would you support that inference? So here are some examples from the video that we put together in the slideshow. One of the birds is vocalizing while it was alone. A second bird arrived seconds later. An inference we could make from that might be that the first bird called for the second bird to come to the nest. The observation, maybe that's why I was thinking about the parking lot, because it's in the lesson. The bird pair built their nest in a parking lot. You could infer that the bird species like busy places. And that might seem like a strange inference, right? So that might be something that you need to back up with some facts there. So that's just kind of an overview and quick look at some of the different approaches we take to Cooped Up Kids. In this observation and inference activity, we do challenge kids to get outside and make observations. We also challenge them to build a mystery box. If you've ever done that, super fun. Where you have an object inside a bag or a box that the kids can't see, and they have to reach in and try and identify it. I generally recommend that it be a volunteer-based experience because it can be very nerve-wracking for some students, and also making sure that they understand the objects inside the box are harmless and not living. But it can be a really fun way to notice kind of the disconnect between your sense of touch and how touch can kind of amplify things, particularly size, when you can't pair it with vision. So it can be a fun way to explore observation and your senses as well. Now I want to talk really briefly about quests. So each Cooped Up Kids activity has 4 to 6 quests afterwards, which are related to the theme of the activity and encourage kids to get outside in just these little bite-sized quick activities. They don't have to be done with the Cooped Up Kids activity. So if you're just looking for like this quick opportunity to do something outdoors, some fun outdoor related challenge, we do have just a whole suite of quests for you on the quest page. Like I said, they do tie into the Cooped Up Kids. So if you wanted to look through for ones that fit the themes, that could be a super fun approach. But otherwise, there's just a lot of really fun, easy activity ideas there. So one might be making a sound map. Another might be identifying 5 birds outside with Merlin bird ID. So simple things like that, but there's a wealth of ideas there for you to explore. Some other resources that you might be interested in include Investigating Evidence, which is a free download from our website, and it uses citizen science to inspire inquiry projects and then scaffolds the process of doing inquiry, nature-based inquiry projects with your students, including things like helping you sort out your timeline, and how to make sure you're creating fair experiments. If you're looking for just more fun, easy outdoor activities, the Explorer's Guidebook is a great option. It's available both in English and Spanish. It's written at a 4th grade level, inspired by the Every Kid in a Park initiative. So it can be done a standalone kind of, or independently, I should say, for 4th grade level readers and up, or done as a guided experience for younger kids. And then I also wanted to draw your attention to Feathered Friends, which is a free download from our website. There are 10 monthly lessons with indoor and outdoor components, and they have lots of seasonal themes, including bird diversity, habitat, flight and migration, conservation, and citizen science. And the super secret is when you download this lesson for free, you get a link to get a window bird feeder for just the $6 shipping. So you can start bringing birds right into you and having some fun working on your observation skills that way. All right, with that, I want to open the floor to any questions that you might have and say, I know we're all busy these days, so if you need to pop out, I want to just make sure that I highlight our contact information for you here, because if you would like a letter of completion for 1 contact hour for this webinar, just please email us at k12lab@cornell.edu and we can send that along for you. Any questions about Cooped Up Kids or other resources? Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself for a second, but definitely we'll still be hanging out for a little bit. Please feel free to ask questions, or otherwise we'll hope to see you at a future webinar. Thank you so much. Oh, Mary Jean, I'm sorry that you weren't able to come in the lab. The good news is it did recently reopen. So if you're out this way again, I hope you'll come see us. Thanks for attending, everyone. Appreciate it. Hey, Stacy. The Cooped Up Kids resources are all on our website, and either Susan or I will share that link for you again in the chat window here. Thank you, Susan.